everybody, how we doing? All right, today is a day. All right, today's a day that I've been postponing for a long time for various reasons. Mostly that I've just been busy. But we're finally gonna showcase the local parks and start shipping it. Now we have sort of been secretly shipping them for the past month or so, but now they're available to everybody, and I want to walk through it and answer some questions in the chat, and just sort of let you understand why this thing is so interesting to me. So if you have any questions, at me in the chat, and I will make sure that I answer every question. If I don't answer it, ask it again, and I will do my best. So what we're talking about today is the local parks. And the local parks is an oscillator, and it uses the same filter, or the same oscillator core that we've used now for many years in pretty much every oscillator we've done. It's in Taiga, the double helix, and it's slowly been evolving. So the core is very solid, it's very stable. What we're doing with the local parks is now integrating some of the stuff that is going to be in the Voltage Lab 2 and some other interesting things. But it's still meant to be sort of a utility Eurorack oscillator. So let's stop the little sequence here, and we'll just let this thing kind of drone out. Now, it's important to keep an eye on the oscilloscope for this one if you're interested in this kind of stuff, because some of the stuff you're going to see is really the first time you've been able to do this with analog synthesis. Or as far as I know, I don't know if you can really do this with digital synthesis. I'm sure you could, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you can. And I think it sounds pretty interesting. So we're just going to listen to this second local parks here. And we'll start with the sine wave. So this is our sine wave. You know what? Let me let me open up the filter so that we know exactly what we're listening to. There we go. This is our sine wave. It sounds really nice. This is the same sine wave that we used in the Captain Big O oscillator and also in the Taiga oscillator. And I think it really, really sounds clean, really nice. So we'll step to the next output, which is a half sine. And you can see on this one, we've simply just sort of chopped it off. It's called a half rectified wave, where you chop off the bottom of the waveform, square it off, and then we recenter it so that it's centered again around 0. But what this does is it gives you a little bit for the filter to grab onto. So you have some harmonics there. We'll add some resonance to the filter. You can see there's something there for it. So that is the half sine. Nothing modulatable with these waveforms yet. Frequency modulation, we'll get into that. Here's our triangle wave. You can see it's a nice looking triangle wave. All of our oscillators use a saw core, so we are deriving the triangle from the saw. We're also deriving then the sine from the triangle, and the half sign from the sine. So you could think of it as you start with a saw and you kind of shape it from there. We can add some, you know what, we won't even use a patch cable. We'll just add some frequency modulation. And that's one of the interesting things about this oscillator. It has a built-in low-frequency oscillator. Now the built-in LFO is voltage controllable. It doesn't track volt per octave, but you can voltage control it, or you can there's CV inputs, you can override it. And some of the people that have used this, and I've talked to about this, have wondered why we included a modulation source in the oscillator when they would prefer to use an external modulation source, and they felt like, oh, you could add another feature there. But a lot of the features in this oscillator really depend on movement to make it come alive. So I wanted to incorporate that low frequency oscillator into the module itself, just so you could get it moving without having to patch in a second oscillator. But again, if you have a favorite LFO or something else you want to use, you can patch right over it. And then use this for something else within local parks. So that's our triangle wave. Here's our saw. Nice bright saw, as you can imagine. Because this is a saw core oscillator, it's going to have a really nice sounding saw wave. Sounds nice in a filter. Again, we can FM. And now we get into the really interesting bits. So let's start now with the blade wave. Now this is a waveform that we've used in the past. And here's our double frequency saw wave. This is what you start with the blade. And then as you get the pot to about 50%, you end up with a saw. There we go. It does have a little kink in the end there. It sounds like a saw. Lots of harmonics. Sounds really nice through a filter. But then we can continue on to a square wave. So you can shape this from a double frequency triangle, or I'm sorry, a double frequency saw, to a saw, to a square. And of course, you can modulate all of that. And you can modulate it slowly, or really get out of control with it. But as you can tell, it always retains that fundamental, so it's always going to be in tune. Bill Smith asks, is the blade wave the same as the one in the primary oscillator? It's very similar. We had to change the circuit a little bit because of some part component issues. A couple parts had gone discontinued. So we did change it a little bit and ended up cleaning it up quite a bit. So I think this is the purest version of the blade wave. For better or for worse, it does sound a little bit different. But the fundamental idea is the same. And that's the blade wave. So the next waveform we have, we call it binary. And this one, you know what? We'll get to that one last, because to explain that one, I have to explain the next wave first, which is the pulse wave. I'm going to turn this down a little bit while I talk through it here. Now everybody understands how pulse waves work. If you don't, I'll give you a quick catch up. You have what is essentially a square wave, where the rise is 50% and the fall is 50%, so you're half the time you're on, half the time you're off. And you can change the pulse width. And this one you can go all the way from 0 to 50%. And you can modulate that. Now something else we can do, and this is what makes local parks really, really interesting. And this is the thing that you haven't been able to do before in analog synthesis. What we can do is we have our pulse wave here. We can add a step to it. And you can see that step coming in now. And listen how it changes the sound of the pulse wave. Really smooths it out, almost becomes like a laser beam sound. Really, really cool. Add a little bit more modulation to that. And we can set that step from 50%, and for a moment I'll turn the modulation off here so you can really see what it's doing. We have full control over that step. And you can hear how it changes the sound of that pulse wave in really interesting ways. But again, retains that fundamental. One other thing we can do with this is we can change the pulse core. Now the pulse core is the waveform we use to derive the pulse wave from. So we can derive it directly from the saw wave, or we can derive it from the sine wave. Now, theoretically, the results should be the same. You're going to get a square wave. But they're a little bit different. They definitely have a different sound to them. So if I switch the pulse core, you can hear how much that changes. And you can see what that does to the waveform. And you can see that now, when you run your pulse width, the step is modulated differently. And we'll turn a little bit of modulation on here. You can see that depending on the core you use, the step is modulated differently. So this is pulse core set to down, and this is pulse core set to up. And you can see how it modulates the step in different ways and has a totally different sound. Really, really interesting. And depending on where you put that step is going to determine how those harmonics sound. And this is taken directly from Oscillator 2 from the Voltage Lab 2. This is one of its tricks. But it just adds so much to the character and the sound of pulse waves and what you can do with it. Temporo Botto asks, what's the HP of this unit? It is 14 HP. Okay, so now knowing what we know about the pulse wave and how you can manipulate it with both the pulse width and the pulse shift, we'll go and we'll talk about the binary. In binary, what that's going to do is mix together in a digital way, sort of an all or nothing way, the LFO and the oscillator. And there's 3 different modes that you can do this in. So let's get the LFO rate up to something in the audio rate. It will change the frequency of the oscillator as well. And again, you can use an external oscillator for this. If you wanted, you could use an external LFO. I could patch, we could take the pulse wave out of this other local parks I have here. And you could hear how that would affect it differently. But I want the sort of atonalness of it using the LFO. So we're going to use that at the moment. And while we do this, pulse width still definitely has an effect on the sound because we're modifying the pulse wave. And we have 3 different versions of how that binary output. Sorry about that. I can turn the volume up for you, sure. Let me go back and listen to... Now that you can hear it, we'll listen to these pulses again. Real quick this time, though. So this is our pulse width, and we can modulate that a little bit. And now we can play with the pulse shift. And again, like I said, there's 2 different pulse cores that we could choose from to get 2 wildly different sounds. And the pulse core determines how that pulse step, the pulse shift, is modulated. So as you can hear, the sounds are very, very different. And of course, you could have a standard pulse waveform if you want. We're not here to judge. And of course, it can go to 0. So if we go for some ridiculous audio rate modulation, pulse widthing to 0, we can find the edge of that. It's probably right about there. And then play with that step. It's some really interesting tones there, too. This is almost like lo-fi radio broadcast tones. And this is doing pulse width at audio rate. Now this is the different pulse core. We'll go back to slow modulation. So as you can hear, this is a standard pulse width modulation. Sounds like pulse width, sounds really nice and beefy, very harmonic rich. And then that step full up, you get this sort of laser smooth sound. I don't know how else to describe it. It sounds nice. Strange Gravity wants to hear the filter on that. So this is, again, playing with that pulse shift, that extra step that we've created, and now switching between the cores. Very different sound. I just love this sort of glassy, smooth pulse sound that you can't get anywhere else. It makes me happy. It's the little things. It's the little things, you know? It just makes me smile. All right, so let's open it back up. We've bypassed the filter again. And now, let's go in and talk about binary. Binary, again, is sort of a logical or a digital mixing of the LFO or an external audio source with the pulse output. So we still have all the pulse width and the pulse shift settings and the core that we can mess around with, but we also have 3 different versions of mixing these 2 oscillators together. And you get different effects. And this is really, this was inspired by the cymbal we recently did, where you do a lot of sort of logical mixing of square waves to create these really dense cymbal sounds. And I thought, well, that sounded really good. And sort of because the local parks was sort of this celebration of square waves, I thought it would be an interesting thing to add. So really, it's there to entertain me. But again, I've used it for a ton of really interesting effects, and I think it sounds very nice. If we now add a So now this is the local parks binary output going through a high-pass filter, and in through the woof, which I'm just using as a VCA. I'm not using any of the EQ settings on the woof. It's just strictly being a VCA. I think there's a lot of interesting sounds there, and we'll sort of go back to our standard, open everything up again. Yoda says the features from this oscillator are going to be in the Voltage Lab 2. It's going to be bonkers. Yeah, it's going to be bonkers. So the modulator in this does have a range switch. So you have audio rate and then slower LFO ranges to choose from. But again, it's also voltage controllable, and you can override anything with external LFOs or a random source or another oscillator or some sort of CV source if you wanted to. All your options are there. But this is a really nice showcase of what we've been trying to do with our circuit design research, which is really stretch the bounds of wave shaping and creating new types of waveforms using analog synthesis. So everything we've done has been pushing in that direction. So being able to manipulate the height of a pulse wave is just one example of the type of thing that we've been working on that we're able to do. Now we're going to be showcasing this all fully in the Voltage Lab 2 when that comes out later this year. But as a standalone oscillator, the local parks is really, really interesting. Really nice. Oh, and one feature that's new to Pittsburgh Modular, which you would think we would have thought of this years ago, but I don't know. We've added an octave switch. So it's the little things. So now I've added in the second oscillator here, and we'll let it see what we can do here. Now this is using the pulse wave from both of these oscillators. So there's quite a bit of sonic information happening here. Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. We're trying. We do have a lot of very interesting stuff coming out this year. All this stuff that we've been working on for the past few years is really starting to find its way out, and I can't be more excited about it. The filter does quite a lot to it there. So let's go back. This is back to just this second oscillator here. It is going through a low-pass filter, and also I'll bypass that for the moment. It's hard in these demos to understand what to show, because an oscillator, I can certainly show you the raw waveforms and the interesting things that the local parks does, because I think it's really, really fascinating, and it's important for you guys to understand what you're going to get if you're interested in ordering it. But I also think there's something to be said for showing things in context. So the idea that you're going to listen to this through a filter, that's how most of the time you're going to use, I think anyway. You know, I'm not here to tell you how to synthesize, but I would assume most people are going to run their oscillators and certainly square waves through filters. So I think it's okay to showcase some of that too. Andrew asks, he says he's not complaining. That's not a good sign. But asks, why no modulation of pulse shift? And in the context of this, there's just a lesser effect when you're moving that in real time. Voltage controlling that versus voltage controlling the pulse width there's not a huge sonic difference there. So it's almost redundant to have them both moving. Go back and listen to the blade wave again. And again, we've done versions of this waveform in the past, but this is the most refined, the cleanest version of it, the purest version of it that we've done. It gives you almost like the sense of pulse width within the context of a saw wave, which is interesting. For like a chorus effect. And you can, of course, you can get ridiculous with it. So this is now syncing, or I'm sorry, it's using the blade wave. It's modulating it now with the other oscillator, which gives you almost like a hard sync effect or a soft sync effect. This is turning that first oscillator on. Very interesting. You can hear this is without it. But this is modulating it with the binary wave from the first one. That is almost like a reverby effect. Weird. A self-patch craziness example would sort of be, I would have to tear it apart. And I don't know if that's worth in the context of a video. This was really meant to be a showcase of, hey, here's what it is. Here's how you use it. I think I've covered that at this point. So I will patch around now a little bit. But if you're watching this after the live, feel free to, hopefully you've got what you came to see at this point. And again, if anybody has any questions, please ask them in the chat. Alani asks, what happened to the drum machine? Nothing happened to it. It's still in development. Herman's been beta testing it for us, which is fantastic. Just curious how this would sound through a wave folder. Can you wave folder a square wave? LOL. Not in the setup that I have here. I don't have a wave folder in my case. But we can wavefold square waves, as you know. And within the context of the Voltage Lab 2, you will be able to run this through a wave folder. So yeah, there you go. Is the sync a hard reset style sync? Yes, the sync is hard sync. Throw a kick on there and you've got a gnarly techno tune. Yeah, I don't have, because I use this little nifty case to sort of focus on just the oscillators. I don't have a whole lot to choose from here as far as building out a larger patch. Two of these together can get pretty darn dense. Uh-oh. Hold on. I don't know if you can hear that, but that's one of the guys from Create Audio calling me at the perfect time. So there we are. That is the local parks. It's available now from the PittsburghModular.com website. It's shipping already. We shipped out a bunch today. So if you ordered yours in the last 24 hours, it went out today. And we've got a bunch on the shelves. We made 200 of them. That's all there's going to be. We don't have any intention of making more than that. I have my 4, so I'm good. And yeah, feel free to email us at richard@pittsburghmodular.com, or yeah, email me. And if you have any weird questions or anything I didn't cover here, what's the grossest, most useless sound you can get out of the local parks? Yotis, they're all beautiful. It really just, it really depends on modulation. This oscillator really likes a lot of modulation. So the more you give it, the more modulation you give it, the more smeared and smashed it's going to sound. But it's designed to not lose its mind, so it's not going to ever sound distorted, so to speak. It's always going to, I would say, smashed and smeared would be a better way to describe it. Incredibly dense are the types of sounds that you're going to get out of it. Eugen San asks, will we see those dual fader function generators again? 3900 in VRL. It's pretty much an analog maths and the best thing ever. Maths is analog, first of all. They're all based on the Surge dual slope generator. There's some minor changes here and there and differences between the Surge dual slope generator, the Make Noise Maths, and our function generators, but the core is based on that Surge dual slope generator. You will see that again in the Voltage Lab 2, although we did not use sliders this time. But we did expand on their capabilities, so there is more that you can do with them in the Voltage Lab 2 than you could in the Voltage Lab. Oh no. There we go. All right, well, I think this is a good time to end the video. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and hanging out with me as I explain the local parks. Again, if you have any questions, you can email me, richard@pittsburghmodular.com. Otherwise, they're available now, and I will talk to you guys very soon. Bye, everyone.